I just wanted to welcome all our attendees that are signed on. It looks like there's 48 of you at this point, so that's very good. My name is Ken Fonce. I am the chair of the Moscow Human Rights Commission, and this panel on strengthening relationships between police and community. This is the third of these forums that the Human Rights Commission has hosted along with our co-sponsors, which I'll name in just a moment. And the first one was on implicit bias. This is part 2 of that one because there were a lot of issues and questions that didn't get dealt with because we ran out of time. The second forum was on crisis intervention training. And so those questions related to that and mental health. And so I wanted to welcome you all into this. And I will, our sponsors, besides the Moscow Human Rights Commission, is the Latah County Human Rights Task Force and the Moscow Anti-Racism Alliance. And so those are our co-sponsors. And so I would like to go ahead and introduce our moderator this evening, and she will introduce the panelists. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Faith Lutze. She is with a professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. And her current research interests include drug courts, the professional role of community corrections officers, offender adjustment to community correction supervision, violence against women, and gender injustice with an emphasis on masculinity in prisons, and many, many other areas that she does along those lines. And she has also won numerous awards that I won't go into, but look her up on the WSU webpage. There's quite a bit more information. And so Dr. Lutze, I will turn it over to you. And the last thing I want to say is if you have any questions as we're progressing through this, we will have a question and answer period near the end. If you would post those in the Q&A window on your Zoom, if you have any of those questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. And so thank you, Dr. Lutze, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fonce. I appreciate it. And it's an honor to be here and have the opportunity to moderate this panel. So first, I would like to introduce Police Chief James Fry of the Moscow Police Department. He began working in the Moscow Police Department in 1995 as a full-time officer, and he became Chief of Police in 2016. So thank you for being here, Chief Fry. I would also like to introduce Sheriff Richard Skiles. He's been with the Latah County Sheriff's Office since 1996. He was elected sheriff in 2016 and re-elected again in 2020. So welcome, Sheriff Skiles. Next, I'd like to introduce Trymaine Gaither. He's the Special Assistant to the Provost for Inclusive Excellence. He joined the Washington State University Honors College in 2019 as the Recruitment and Career Coordinator and MESI Coordinator. He has worked with the Martin Luther King Jr. Program Committee. He was awarded the 2020 Martin Luther King Jr. Distinguished Service Award, which is one of the most prestigious awards given by Washington State University. In 2021, he joined the Provost office. So welcome, Trymaine. Next, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. David Makin, who's with the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. He's the director of the Complex Social Interactions Lab. He is also a research faculty with the Washington State Institute of Criminal Justice, in which he collaborates with the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs and other public safety agencies to advance applied research and innovative public safety practices. And just to give kudos to him as well, the Complex Social Interactions Lab is one of the few in the country that analyzes body-worn camera footage and then uses that information to inform training. So welcome, and I will start with the questions. So the first question, and please feel free, Sheriff Skiles or Chief Fry, to just start as you wish. The first question is about accountability. So if an officer is reprimanded or other action taken regarding bias, how is that recorded within your agency?
So with the Moscow Police Department, we all know that everybody has a bias or biases that we need to keep in check. If we saw that there was a bias that was, maybe a violation or a specific issue, we would actually document that in their personnel jacket, and then we would provide training for them to try to alter that bias for that it brings it back around to what the norm or society deems as acceptable.
Thank you. Sheriff Skiles? He's either
frozen.
Yeah, he's either striking a pose or he.
Can you hear me okay?
A little broken. And your screen is frozen.
You can't hear me?
Go ahead, Sheriff Skiles.
Everything's working good on my end. I can see everybody and everything's fine. Should I?
Yeah, we're having difficulty hearing you.
Okay, so I must have a poor connection. I would do the same as about Chief Fry. So usually in those kind of situations, it's going to be about the same with our department.
Okay, thank you. Would the other panelists like to contribute in response?
Quick question for Ms. Chief Fry is, how long do you retain those records? So we know that tends to be an issue in police agencies, is that there's a period in which you'll hold those and then they're expunged. I was just curious to hear in terms of the Moscow Police Department, how you handle that.
Typically, we would keep that in their jacket until they left our agency. But even after that, typically what I've been doing with officers who have left the agency, we burn their file onto a historical disk so that we have that, so that if other agencies were to call, since I've been the chief, I've had agencies call on officers that I don't even remember who they were. So we had to go back and look. So we'll retain that information so that it's a valuable piece for those other agencies if someone's trying to get hired.
Thank you. Sheriff Skiles, hopefully we can hear you now.
Can you hear me yet?
No, I'm wondering if you turn off your video for a moment.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's better.
Yes, I'll.
I'm sorry, we're still having difficulty.
Is it okay? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you can't hear me?
It's very broken with a lot of pauses.
You can hear me?
We can hear you, but it's broken with a lot of pauses.
I'm sorry, I live.
How about now?
That's better.
Is that better?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I had a speaker thing hooked up, and I think that's what's causing interference.
Yeah.
But I can't hardly hear now, but I'll just try to. But because I live out in the country, but I've done both the other ones I've done from my house here. So anyway, I would like to with that last question. Typically, if we have somebody that has issues, we don't really want that the history of what they're doing to go away. So we keep it in their file, like Chief Fry said. If they go somewhere else, or if another officer comes here as a lateral that wants to hire on, we kind of want to know what they're about, what kind of troubles they've had in the past, if any, or whatever. And so personnel files are pretty important to Chief Fry and I both. So if we hire a lateral, for instance, we will, both of us, either one of us, I know we'll send, we do an extensive background, and part of the background is seeing what's in an employee's file in a whole nother agency. So it's important that we be able to see that and keep those records so we can better choose who we want to hire for our communities.
All right, thank you. Is the information available to the public? And if so, where and how is it accessible?
Typically, people's personnel jackets are not open to public view, just like probably yours as a professor isn't open to public view. We're no different, but we hold those. You'd have to, our HR sees them, obviously, and people like that, but I would not say they're open to the general public.
All right, so are there any further questions from the other panelists about accountability and just record keeping around officers' interactions with the public? Okay. All right, so the next set of questions regard implicit bias. From your perspective, are hires vetted for implicit bias regarding race and ethnicity? And if so, how?
I can go first on that one. So we have a extensive background, like Sheriff Skiles was talking about, and part of that background is we have about a 231 question questionnaire, and some of those questions that are in that, have you observed the applicant to, so like when we're talking to people, because we fly officers to Georgia, wherever we're hired the person from, and we'll actually be asking questions. Do you ever observed them to display racial prejudices? Do you know of the applicant to be a part of any radical groups against the government or against other ethnicity groups? We also look at all their social media sites, and we look to see what they've been posting, what types of groups they're tied in with, and then we also ask them questions if they're a part of any of those groups or anything, to see if they're telling us the truth.
Sheriff Skiles?
That's about the same as I would say.
Okay. Do you have them do any formal implicit bias tests that are validated to test for implicit bias?
Are you talking when they're hired on?
Yeah, either prior to or once they're hired.
We don't at this time. We put them through training and stuff once they get hired on, but I can't recall of any that we do in the hiring process.
And so then you rely mostly on self-report data and then the observations of others who work.
I would say that I know that Chief Fry and I both. Yes.
Okay.
Right. And then also in the interview, because we do a pretty extensive interview, Chief Fry and I both do, when you ask them a question or whatever, they'll tell you, the things that you can kind of read a person when you've been doing things as long as we have, I guess, probably all of you too, you can kind of read a person and determine if that's going to be a good fit for your department, if they have any bias or not.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions by the panelists, Trymaine or David, regarding implicit bias?
I guess my question would be, what type of implicit bias or ongoing training do you provide for your current officers once they are a part of the team?
This year we started probably doing more implicit bias than we've ever done in the past. We did 2 that we required our officers to go through. One was taught by a retired lieutenant. The other was Trymaine Galloway. He was a Boise police officer who now is no longer with the department, but teaches different courses. And we're actually looking at bringing another individual in this spring. And I'm actually going to open that up to where all city employees get to go through it. What we have to realize is it's not just police officers who may have implicit biases. It may be firefighters. It may be our city crews. So we're going to try to open that up to a citywide and part of our university as well.
Chief Fry, is part of that, are you collecting any of the data on just as they go through those trainings is one thing, which is great, but then thinking about, as Dr. Lutze mentioned, some of those standardized instruments that allow us to assess personally where we are, to recognize those implicit biases that we hold, and then to work towards countering those, which is one thing to say that it's collecting that data and just seeing how a person over time, we can have interactions, and they might very well influence us. And it's helpful to have some of these standardized instruments that we can kind of baseline where we're at, and then think about as we can collect this data over a longer period of time.
We have not actually, but I've worked with you in the past, David. Maybe that's something we can do to improve our policing and the way we do things. So maybe we'll talk about that afterwards and see what we can work up. Okay.
I would like to just mention that though I've never been an officer or anything like that, from where I sit in the community, it appears as though officers have a lot of discretion in their day-to-day encounters. And discretion can be through a very biased lens. And that's something that I'm always concerned about, because a culture can be created where certain discretions kind of reinforce itself. So I think it's imperative to have confidence in police officers that they are working on their biases, because we all have biases. And I would also argue that for officers, it's their empathy that's their greatest tool. And cultivating empathy and a culture of empathy is important as well.
I would agree with you on that. Part of our core values is we don't have empathy, but we have compassion, and compassion, I think, runs along with empathy. Because if we can't have compassion for people and empathy for what they're going through, and we see people typically at the worst times of their lives, and we're trying to influence our officers that you can make a great impact on people, and you may never know the impact that you've made, good or bad. But let's take this opportunity to make it a good experience. Faith, you mentioned a situation where you dealt with some of our officers on a medical call, and where you were with them working, and they had the exact community policing attitude that you would expect to see in officers. So that's always good for us to hear and see, but to continue to strive for.
Sheriff Skiles, would you like to respond?
I would like to add. Yeah, I would just like to, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I would like to say that, okay, good, thank you. I would also like to say that in today's world of technology and social media and everything, it's easy if we do have an officer that steps over the line or whatever. I know that Chief Fry and myself are pretty easy to get a hold of. My cell phone number's on my Facebook page. I can be emailed or whatever. So I do get a lot of public feedback on a regular basis on the performance of my deputies out in the field. So I think if we don't like very much, it's we'll hear about it. Chief Fry and I definitely will hear about it. So I just want people to know that too, that we're accessible, and that if we do have a situation or an incident, that it gets dealt with pretty much immediately. Thank you.
So the next question, so as both of you have indicated, right, your officers are part of a broader community. and community networks and so forth. So what are police officers doing to isolate their own political ideas and ideologies from their work when you're interacting with people all of the time and in the line of duty? So, Ray, I mean, because officers are allowed to have their personal political beliefs and affiliations with various community groups and so forth. But how do you work to, and how do officers work to really separate their own personal views from their job?
I'll let Sheriff Skiles start this time. I've been starting, so I'll let him go ahead and go, and then I'll follow up.
I don't, so I think that's part of the training that we go through and everything. It's even you could even take that as far as, you know, if we go to a domestic or whatever, how do we keep our personal feelings out of this situation or the call that we're on? I think that we go through a lot of different types of training that helps us with how we're supposed to respond or whatever. But yes, everybody, we all are entitled to how we feel about something. So I think that you just, I think it's really professional. If you're professional and you're doing a good job of that, your personal life is kind of separate from the calls you're going to, the people that you're meeting and things like that. So I think as long as we maintain that professionalism, I know I have guys that feel different about other things that I feel different about or whatever. So I think that it's important that we just maintain a certain amount of professionalism, and we lead from the top. You know, we set an example and lead by example, Chief Fry and I both, and we don't go around saying things that we don't, you know, if there's something him and I don't like, we lead by example by not really expressing that while we're in uniform on duty or whatever. So I think it's just part of that professionalism and that work ethic.
Yeah, I would say Sheriff Skiles is exactly right. We get part of our training through the Post Academy and our field training that we do with officers. We have to stay neutral. We don't get to pick sides. We don't get to pick one political party over another. We have those beliefs at home or whatever, but to be a professional, we need to stay neutral and do the job and serve all community members.
Okay. Thank you. Would other panelists like to respond? Okay, so the next question you've both made mention of, and this is about technology and social media. And the question is, what technology, social media presence do you investigate when looking to hire a new officer? And I think you both already responded to that. But I would like to kind of just put a different frame to it. How do you check for officers who may have aliases online so that it's not immediately available in terms of a traditional background check? Because officers and recruits know that you're going to be checking their social media. So do you have methods to kind of go beyond the face of it, the front presence of their social identity, and kind of move past that?
I see what you're asking. I think Chief Fry can answer this pretty well. It's really easy. He has a guy that really is a computer tech, and it's pretty easy to get to find out those aliases and run down what, you know, like if you have a hidden page or whatever, it's pretty easy to actually find that stuff if you've got a computer tech. But I'll let Chief Fry, because he's the guy I might use if I really share his computer guy with some of those harder things that we have to solve.
Yeah, and I'm actually very fortunate. I actually have two forensic detectives who can look into things like that. You know, do we typically look for that type of stuff in the initial? Probably not, but as you're going along these backgrounds and you're finding out stuff, it is pretty amazing. You know, over the last probably 10 years, we've not hired people because of things we've found out because of the extensive backgrounds we do. You know, when we're talking to friends and neighbors and family, ex-wives are always good, it seems like, to find out stuff. But we use all those avenues to make sure that we get the most professional employee that we can get.
So to follow up on that, so you hire someone and then you discover an officer has extremist views, and you discover those extremist views after they're already on the force and they're one of your employees. What actions do you take, or what actions can you take if you do discover someone that has extremist views around, race, gender, sexual identity?
It would be hard. Okay, so if he was already hired and he had that,
Yeah. I'd also probably have
that-
to talk to our legal to see if there was anything, if there was any criminal activity or anything like that. If there is criminal activity based on that, in our system in Idaho, that field training program and up to a year, we have a year probation with our officers. So at any point in time, we can release them from their duties.
Sheriff Skiles, you were just a little bit delayed, so Chief Fry spoke first there, but would you like to add as well?
I was just going to say, in the background check, it's not very likely that one would get hired with those kind of issues at all. With an extensive background check, I know that Chief Fry and I do a really extensive background check. I'll send a detective if I feel I need to. I'll send a detective. Like if you were a lateral from Montana or something, I would send a detective over there and he would talk to people. And I know that if you go to a department and you talk to the 6 people that are working that day or however many, if the detective does, you find out about a person really fast. So if a person was already hired, we have policy. Chief Fry and I both have policy that does not allow that stuff. So then we would deal with that accordingly.
And would fellow officers be likely to report such behavior? So if someone was making inappropriate comments or jokes, would fellow officers have a route to share that information or to express it with the command?
We actually have a policy in place that says if an officer is on a call and hears anything, or if they see something that is out of line by another officer, that they have to report to us. And if we find out that they don't, then they can be held in violation of the policy as well.
Thank you. Sheriff Skiles?
Same thing.
Okay. All right, thank you. Do the other panelists have questions related to implicit bias and the conversation thus far?
No, I was very pleased to hear that duty bound to intervene. So we always think about in that context of use of force, right? You're duty bound to intervene when an officer is violating policy, but it's encouraging to hear, if they're making discourteous comments as it relates to race, gender, or any particular status, that they're duty bound to intervene and to say something. So that's it's incredibly important.
All right, thank you. So the next questions regard training, and I believe we've already spoken to this in terms of how much training is received and does it include implicit bias and you both indicated that both of your agencies take it very seriously and do provide training. So I'm going to switch this question up a little bit. Is there any training that you don't have that you would really like to see, that you would feel would be beneficial to your agencies, to your officers, to the community?
So at the Moscow Police Department, there's always the ones that we send officers to for interviews and interrogation, stuff like that. But it is fairly difficult to find implicit bias type training to bring into our area, plus have it on a budget and stuff. But also the CIT training, the critical incident training, which is very valuable. I think the Department of Health and Welfare only puts on one course every year. We're trying to get all of our officers to that because we know that we're dealing with mental health and we're dealing with people with, in every situation. Actually, it teaches you how to de-escalate and it teaches you how to talk to people. So if we could get more of that, that would be great for us.
I think you're going to see more and more of that type of training. Last year we did a verbal judo class. The whole entire courthouse did it with all of my deputies, and I'm not sure if Chief Fry sent some to it. It just teaches you how to talk to people, teaches you how to de-escalate situations. It's put on by a professional law enforcement guy that's been in law enforcement for years. And I've been through the class myself twice. So I know what it's about. It's an all-day training, 8-hour course. And it just provides a lot of information on bias and how to treat people, how to talk to people, how to de-escalate. I sent almost, I believe all of my guys have been through that. So that kind of stuff helps a lot.
All right, so if there's no other comments or questions about training, the next set of questions have to do with recruitment and diversity of law enforcement. Well, first of all, what is the racial and ethnic makeup of your police departments? And then is there any attempt to increase, or do you view a need for, or is there any attempt to increase the racial and ethnic diversity of law enforcement, Moscow and Latah County?
You want to go first, Sheriff, or me? I think he's frozen again. So at the Moscow Police Department, we have.
The volume is, I can't get my phone any higher, so I guess it's the question.
We just lost you, I think, Sheriff Skiles, you're frozen and we're having a hard time hearing you. And there's also a delay. Chief Fry, maybe you'd like to respond?
Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, so
Chief
the
Fry,
Moscow
go ahead.
Moscow Police Department has one Latino officer, female officer. Would I love to have more diversity? I would. It's I think a difficult to recruit into our area. I do have more females than I've ever had in the past, which is a great addition to the department. But it is a difficult, I think, recruiting, at least from my perspective, because I'm not quite sure how to reach out to those groups at this point. So, you know, if you have any suggestions on that, that would be great.
I have an Asian male, and I have a female that's going through FTO right now. And I am happy to have diversity if they apply and can pass everything. I'm happy to have it.
Thank you. David, you were about to look like you had your mic off there for a moment.
No, absolutely. I think it is important that, I think, at least for the audience that's here, because I think the sheriff and the chief, it's important to contextualize the challenges. And so this is a consistent challenge in rural policing, particularly. So the COPS office, essentially the Department of Justice, they issued an entire report recently that was specifically focused on how rural communities can increase their diversity and all of the challenges that are associated. And there's a lot of really great recommendations. I know I shared that with Chief Fry, and some of it is beyond the police agency. These are really about efforts that local city government needs to invest in to really convey the value and why you would want to live in this community. And we tend to look at the lack of diversity in rural police departments, and we assume that the agency isn't doing enough, when the reality is, and if you're able to read this report, and you can certainly refer folks to it, is that there is a lot on the role of local government in increasing diversity. So I just think it's an important part for the audience to be aware of, that it is a pressing known challenge. But again, this report was released, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. And it was a whole series of interviews with agencies and looking at all the challenges and how they got really creative to try to bring people in. They were sending recruitment pamphlets to everywhere. It's like everything that we would all say you should do, they were doing. And they still were not seeing those same results. And so they realized that it was a very much a holistic effort that was in part with police and among other entities in local government.
I think we need to, going with that as well, David. The part of the problem is we're having problems just getting applicants, and that we want all applicants. But with housing prices around here and everything's skyrocketing and moving up, our pay's not that great compared to even just across the border at Pullman. So that's a challenge with us too. And we're trying to keep competitive there so that we can attract applicants and good applicants.
I'm wondering, and Trymaine, you may be able to speak to this better than I, but I'm curious, both Chief and Sheriff Skiles, how might the universities assist you in increasing diversity and building that community in terms of local government and so forth to increase diversity?
Well, I can tell you, just as recently as this year, we started a focus group up on the University of Idaho campus that I'm a part of, President Green's a part of, and individuals from the diversity department. And we're starting to build those relationships with diversity groups, which I think will help us in the future. People are getting to know us as the police, and we're trying to build those relationships so that I'm hoping in the future we can use that as a recruiting tool, and the university will help with that, I'm sure.
Yeah, in a perfect world, universities would be able to assist. In a perfect world, I can only speak really for WSUPD, is to really work with spousal support, to be able to support the spouse. That's often a great tool to attract diverse potential staff into this region, because it can be a deal breaker for many families because there's so few employers here. But if we could help the spouse find employment here, assist with the typical things that we do, whether it's assisting with that child care options, real estate options, those things go a long way as well.
Is WSU doing that, Trymaine?
Not to my knowledge, no. Okay. We're not doing that, but it's always something that we're really, when I'm talking about the police department and the WSUPD, that is, we're not doing that, but it's something we're always working towards.
I think one unique thing about WSU is the cadet program, which has become, as you know, for Chief Jenkins and Pullman Police Department, and of course with Bill, at WSUPD, it's a feeder program. So you look at the diversity growth in those departments. They have a feeder program. You have police cadets, young cadets going through school, practicing, learning, training, and then they make their way different law enforcement agencies around Washington and other areas. But some come here, love here, want to stay here. And we've seen them hire some just tremendous officers that essentially have been field tested. For the last 2 years, they've been performing police-like duties. And what a great opportunity to vet out candidates and to really identify, officers. I think the recent hires that both have had, female officers, were cadets. They kind of matriculated through those programs, scored at the top of their class, and now find themselves at both respective departments.
So I think the panelists have spoken to this, but I think it's a great question. So I'm going to ask it because I really am enjoying sort of the brainstorming about how to address issues of diversity and recruitment. What if small departments and small communities are insular with self-reinforcing biases? What can be done to prevent or remedy that? So, you know, we sometimes think that it's difficult to recruit people because of the lack of diversity in the community or the smallness of our community and the rural nature of it. But what if it's us? You know, what if that's what's preventing people of diverse backgrounds to come to Moscow?
Well, I think tonight. Go ahead, Sheriff.
I was just going to say, I think Moscow is exactly the opposite of what you're saying, in the sense that I've lived here all my life, and I think it's really diverse and has the opportunities for any kind of race or anybody to come here, I think. And a lot of people do. Do they want to be cops? I don't know. But I think the opportunities in this area are really good with the college and the work opportunities and everything. And Moscow's always been really open to diversity, I think. And so I don't think it's us.
But if it is, I think having these conversations like we're having tonight, and the openness and the willingness to discuss issues and brainstorm to try to talk about the issues and talk about some of the fears. And I don't have the same fears that some people do. With the focus group, what I've come to realize is I don't have the same fears that students of color who come to the University of Idaho have. So we need to build those relationships. We need to build those bonds so that there is a trust, because the policing that they may have come from probably or could look totally different than what style of policing that we have. So we got to build those relationships, and that's on us as a community to do that.
Okay. All right, I'm going to kind of combine two questions here because I believe you've addressed many of the issues. So you've already talked about steps that are taken and kind of brainstorming how you might diversify your force in relationship to race, ethnicity, religious minorities, the LGBTQ plus community. And so then the question is what practices are you putting in place to encourage diverse opinions in your department and your staff? So I guess, so now I think this question moves from sort of the community to within your own department. Are you providing a space for those diverse ideas and perspectives? Is it a safe space for your officers to have those exchanges and to develop their attitudes towards diversity?
I guess I'll go. I would tell you probably 15, 20 years ago, no. But we have worked very hard at the culture of our police department, and with the understanding that we all have different points of view. We all come from different backgrounds. We have, just during the political times, we have some who voted for President Trump, some who voted for President Biden. And that's, we're trying to make it so that we realize we all have that right to have those opinions, and through discussions and relationships, that's where you either change an opinion or give your point of view. But I think there is a free and open space to do that. Sure, there's probably a little bit of hesitancy with our newer officers, but hopefully with our older officers, as the younger ones are seeing that they're having those discussions, that'll open that up and continue to build on that.
Sheriff, would you like to speak to that point or question?
I would say too, just adding to that. Yeah, first I want to apologize for my phone being messed up and not being able to participate like I should be able to or would like to. But I think that same as with Chief Fry, I agree that probably 20 years ago it was different than it is. Chief Fry and I were both in law enforcement that long ago, and it is changed. The culture's changed, ideas have changed, thoughts have changed, and I think overall it's actually way better than it was 20 years ago.
Okay.
The neat thing is too, is where we look forward to things actually progressing and getting better with different kinds of classes and ideas and different kinds of people that come and apply. I think it's pretty neat actually where we're going. So, and where the Moscow PD is going.
Trymaine, I'm not sure if I read your body language correctly or not, but were you about to add to the conversation?
Sure, I'll say something. I think that whenever we're talking about diversity and equity and inclusion and building that culture, I want to say that that to really create inclusion, diversity of thought, and when you're talking about things are different 20 years ago than they are today, I think it's very important to create inclusion with the examination of policy first. If those policies were created 15 to 20 years ago, were they created with a lens of equity and belonging? Were they created based on some broken glass theory that requires zero tolerance or crack down on certain small misdemeanors? I think it's imperative to review and examine your policies through an equity lens, or an equity audit to be more specific, if you really want to create an inclusive and diverse culture.
Right. And so just to comment on that, I would say that our policies have been changed and honed to be better serving to the employees and the public from what they were 20 years ago. They were pretty basic 20 years ago, probably. And now they're more detailed and more specific to our time. So I think it's way better than it was a long time ago.
I'm curious, do your policies undergo those? I should temper this with that could be made available to the public for public comment. So this is a process that Trymaine and I are both on the WSU Police Advisory Board. I'm on the Pullman Advisory Board as well. And this is a process that both departments are going through as they revise their policy. Those that are appropriate, they're putting out to the community to be able to review, to add comment, to modify as appropriate. I'm just curious if both of your agencies, if you allow for that, or if that would be something that you would welcome and you would encourage to have public comment on. Again, what a policy that would be appropriate for them to comment on.
So we have not at this point. I have had some discussions with our legal counsel about that, but with in reference to the 8 can't wait that came out during the George Floyd incident, I actually did go through and highlight every policy that we've had in place for the last 20 years that covers all of those 8 issues. We've already had them in policy, and I did put them out, and I've shared them with the public and with different groups, just so that they understand that we understand that those policies are important, and we've had them in place, and we'll continue to have them in place.
All right. Thank you for that conversation and for the response. So now we're going to shift gears and talk about harassment versus hate crimes. So for minorities, harassment such as being followed in a store or swastikas or other such symbols on doors or on cars or Confederate flags are serious. But when reported to the police, they're told that there's nothing that can be done. So what are your thoughts about, can you inform our audience about how your officers are instructed to respond, and then what kinds of things can they do within your legal authority to do so?
I think the sheriff's frozen again, maybe. what I would say, first of all, is have people report those instances. You know, they may not be a crime. It may fall underneath the freedom of speech things, but they can still be documented. And when things are documented such that it still gives us information that may play in later if something was to happen. So I think it's always important to still document those incidences and have a information report put on them.
Sheriff Skiles, maybe you seem frozen, but maybe we can still hear you if you'd like to respond. Okay. All right. Unfortunately, we can't hear the sheriff, and his video appears to be frozen.
Just the same, every call that comes in from the public is documented and recorded. So we can keep record that way. But if somebody has a bumper sticker or bummer.
Okay, it's unfortunate
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but you were cut off about probably halfway through your statement.
So, okay. Sorry about that.
Okay. I'm sorry, Sheriff, we're having a hard time hearing you. So I'm going to move on to the next question. In Moscow, there's an ordinance that prohibits discrimination based on sexual.
Okay. I guess I think that yeah, everything's documented and stuff and recorded if someone calls and reports something. So and if it's serious enough, like Chief Price. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that is frustrating. We would really appreciate hearing your thoughts about this. I'm going to move on to the next question. So in Moscow, there's an ordinance that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Yet young LGBTQ+ folks do not feel safe in many parts of the community. So what steps could you take to make members of this marginalized group feel more secure in the Moscow-Latah County area?
Well, I think one of the things we have to continue to do is build relationships. But I'd also say if they don't feel comfortable, they need to get a hold of us and let us know why they don't feel comfortable. But I do want to also reference that ordinance, and that ordinance is referenced to equal opportunities for employment, housing, commercial property, and the use of public accommodations. But it also goes on to say that this chapter shall not create any special rights or privileges which would not be available to all of the city's citizens, because every person has a sexual orientation and a gender identity. But the biggest thing is we have to know about it before we can step in and try to solve some of the problems. And that goes back to building the relationships that we're starting to work on more and more all the time.
So Chief, I do want to follow up on that a bit. I appreciate that you followed up with you are building those relationships more and more, because I think sometimes for marginalized communities, it's difficult to reach out to you and let you know, because there's that fear, a generalized fear. And so oftentimes it's important for those who are in power and who have authority to actually reach out to the groups with an open ear to listen and to hear about their fears, because it's difficult to kind of pass through that boundary when one is fearful and marginalized.
Yeah, and being a part of the focus group that I'm a part of, one of the individuals there stated, you need to come to us, not us have to come to you. And that resonated with me for the fact that we we don't always think that, you know, we need to be the ones that start those relationships and start those conversations. But that's our goal, and we're working on it. I just wish there was about another 10 hours in the day to get some of the stuff done, but continue to strive forward on those.
So do you have specified officers who serve as liaisons to different groups in the community?
You know, we don't. That probably would be a good idea to start building those relationships so they have at least a person of contact. I'll write that down. Actually, that's a good point.
Sheriff, would you like to contribute? Hopefully we can hear you this time. Okay. Okay.
Yes, Chief Fry and I meet on a regular basis. And so him and I can actually talk about that and come up with a strategy.
All right, thank you. So the next question has to do with de-escalation. So what is done to train officers in de-escalation? Does this cover large crowds and protests?
Did you hear me?
Yeah, I did. Thank you very much. I think there's a little delay going both ways. So unfortunately, it's just unfortunate. In the world of Zoom, it is unfortunate. So speaking about de-escalation, so what is done to train officers in de-escalation? Does this cover large crowds and protests, and who gives this training?
So officers,
right?
The academy's actually changed a lot of the ways that they train, a lot more scenario based, so that it's more real life other than just, you know, reading it out of a book. You actually have role players and everything. So that helps with our de-escalation. We also, like I said, send the officers to the CIT training. Although it's for mental health, it really does carry over into all aspects of our, you know, dealing with people who are very highly emotional or agitated, as well as the verbal judo training that we send officers to. But we also continue that dialogue through our FTO training, as well as when we're on the firearms range. You know, all those de-escalation tools go into play out there as well. So we're really trying to go to more of a, like I said, a scenario-based type, which makes it way more real life than probably when I was trained.
All right, thank you, Sheriff. Oh, go ahead, Trymaine.
I have a question for Chief Fry. When I think about de-escalation, I'm thinking about the start of the issue. A lot of confrontations, the 911 dispatcher call, and the language that's used. You know, is there an evolution of the language of that dispatcher call? Words like disturbance, domestic, prior violence in the home. And is that terminology really serving the community and serving the officers? Because how do you triage those situations when the root of the matter could be a mental health call, a social issues call, addictions call, right? How can that dispatcher call evolve? And is it already evolving?
Well, I think that's a good point, because the de-escalation probably does start at the dispatch level. You know, they're asking those questions, and a lot of times we're getting that feedback from family members who are calling in. They're having a mental episode or a mental breakdown, or the person is, you know, been using drugs for the last 3 days. So that starts, I think, for us to give us a little bit better of a education when we get there. And we have knowledge that will help us deal with that. You know, we've been very fortunate around here with the calls we go on. We've gone on some pretty serious calls where we've been able to sit and talk to people and get them calmed down to where that it doesn't turn into a use of force situation. But I think we have to train the whole spectrum. We can't just train officers. We have to train the dispatchers as well. And I know that Whitcomb does a great job dispatching for all of us, but the information they gather is vital to us. So I hope that answered what you're asking.
It did. It did. I think for me, I just wonder when I look at other police departments around the country, you know, they're using strategies that are more of a wraparound service where more people are coming on those, coming to that home, you know, whether it's a social worker or a mental health professional. They're going to those homes and with those officers. So I'm wondering if we'll ever see if those practices will one day make it to the police.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm happy to say that it's alive and well. Not probably at the level at some bigger agencies because of the staffing. We actually have a mental health counselor on call now that we call out a lot, and we've utilized this individual numerous times here just in the last month, where they respond to the location. We'll do a field evaluation. We'll still be there for safety, but they're the ones that are now talking to the person with the mental health crisis. And you know, a lot of times we're working very closely with the recovery center to get individuals early on into recovery with them. So we're starting to get there. It's, you know, it comes down to personnel and money a lot of times, but we're starting to get mobile teams like that.
And it's quite impressive, right? So the region, you know, Latah has the, you know, a rural crisis network, right? So, and that is unique among all the different mental health regions in Idaho. I mean, that's how I began to know Chief Fry. It was my research dealing with behavioral health and crisis call outs and mental health calls. And so I think the rural crisis network is, you know, is unique in Idaho. And it's because of the very nature of a rural community. And so being able to think through the resources in that. You know, I wanted to build off Trymaine's question. You know, I guess it kind of lines back with training, but we tend to think so much about de-escalating something that's already escalated without thinking through what did we do that caused it. And I say that, you know, certainly Faith had introduced the lab, and one thing that we've learned from, you know, we've coded 15,000 hours of body cam footage, is looking at, is the officer, you think about like procedural justice, so much of what we can see is it escalates because people are going, I don't know what's happening, right? There's this whole lack of the transparency to the process. Here's who I am. I'm Officer so-and-so. Who are you? Getting their name, using their name, personalizing it, right? Explaining it. Here's why I'm here. Having that active dialogue that takes place. And I think sometimes, you know, we fall back on those scripts just from the nature of doing the job, that we kind of skip some of those steps because it's just the most efficacious way to get to where we want to go, without realizing that what we're doing is escalating the situation because we're not providing that transparency, that accountability about why I'm here, who you are, what's about to happen. And that is critical. And I think that's about training, that's about performance evaluations, and really establishing that this is an interactional and not an adversarial process. It doesn't have to be framed that way.
Yeah, I think it ties back into the community policing philosophy, where we're trying to partner even with those who we're on the call with. You know, there's always a lot of emotion on some of the calls we go on, but if we can partner with them and relate and create a dialogue, I think that does help us in the long run. And that gives us that ability to move through that call and make it have it done successfully.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Sheriff Skiles, are you technologically able to participate or would like to respond to the conversation?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I apologize for the bad connection. I really have felt like I've missed out a little bit, but I've been able to hear everything, so that's good. I'd also like to say the recovery center has been a big help. Daryl down at the recovery center has been a big help. A lot of times, the people that we're going to see are repeat. We're going to that house we've been to before. So we're aware that the problem can be just the same or even getting worse. And so the recovery center has been helping us a lot more. I don't really want, if you haven't really committed a crime and you have something going on, I want, like, the recovery center can help us a lot. And that way you're not taken to jail for something. I can't help you a lot in jail, but the recovery center and other people and some of the programs that Chief Fry's talking about and stuff is starting to help us a lot. So I think we're coming around.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. We have gone over just a little bit in terms of the formal presentation, and now I would like to present to you some questions that are coming from our audience. One attendee is asking, and let me get this on my screen here. It says, I have a point I'd like to raise concerning the intermingling of personal beliefs, values, and professional conduct. Just yesterday, I encountered an officer wearing a Blue Lives Matter mask. While I had a positive interaction with the officer, the mask immediately cued me into their personal standing and made me feel very uncomfortable, especially considering the content of the movement as a counter argument against Black Lives Matter and other anti-racist initiatives. What is your perspective on this expression of opinion while on duty?
I guess I can't respond to that because we don't have those masks. We have a blue mask that says MPD on it.
Okay. Sheriff Skiles, are you familiar with any of your officers wearing Blue Lives Matter masks?
I can check, but I don't think we ordered our masks, and I don't remember ordering any of them that actually said that on the mask, but I can ask the guys and see, because we ordered masks, and if they're not wearing a mask that we issued, then I can take care of that.
So relatedly, related to Blue Lives Matter flag being displayed on sheriff department vehicles, what is the reason that it's displayed? And since this is a symbol that's been used by white supremacist groups recently, this can be seen by communities of color as ideological or political statement. So what are your perspectives on the US flag with the blue stripe, so the Blue Lives Matter flag? What is your perspective on that?
That's just what it is. It's just a flag with our law enforcement blue line on it. Nothing more. It's not meant to be a supremacist thing or whatever you said. So I've never, none of us feel that way about that flag. So basically we were pro law enforcement, like, well, I don't know if that's the word, but it's an American flag with our stripe on it. Because the law enforcement's blue. Maybe Chief Fry could explain it a little bit better, but it's just our flag, and I don't think it means anything. And if another supremacist group or whatever is using it, then I don't know why they would be.
Sure. So as a follow-up,
or what it means by them, it might mean something different.
Would your officers put a Black Lives Matter sticker right next to the Blue Lives Matter sticker on the back of a sheriff's patrol vehicle to be in solidarity and support, to show that you support both movements?
Well, I don't think that would be part, Yeah, that wouldn't be, the flag's a law enforcement flag, so I don't know that I would put anything else on there, but
I just want to say that in this, if we're talking about fostering community and creating belonging, the Blue Lives Matter flag does foster the us versus them mentality, and where the police and the community should be working together. That Blue Lives Matter flag can be seen as divisive by some members of the community. I just want to put that out there.
right. Yeah. I think for us, it's just our flag. It's not necessarily Blue Lives Matter only. That flag's not meant for that at all from us. But I
Okay.
can see, I understand what you're saying.
Thank you, Sheriff. So the next question basically asks, do officers take programs that aren't taught or presented by retired officers? Because that in itself is slightly biased, since they are teaching from their experience and opinions, could be intertwined. So the attendee wants to know, they're wondering if you pursue professionals or professors outside of law enforcement, and they speak about a professor they had at South Seattle College that was really good and could help with controlling your POV and build understanding if you ever wanted to reach out, and then gives a name in there that I can share later. But basically, do you have people from outside of law enforcement without that personal experience providing training?
We do. We've had Minty Longearth come in. She's from over in the Seattle area. The individual that I was talking about that we're going to have come in the spring, hopefully, was actually the head of the diversity over at WSU for years. He lives down in Lapway now, and we're going to be bringing him in. So we don't just seek law enforcement, but what sometimes has to happen too is we do bring in retired law enforcement or people who have been associated with law enforcement, because officers can then resonate with that person as well. But we also step outside of that. It's not just law enforcement only training.
Sheriff Skiles, would you like to respond?
And also, retired law enforcement has 25. Yes, retired law enforcement has 20 or 25 or 30 years of just experience and in professional and schooling and everything. It's really a huge asset to younger officers, especially if they can, teach without a bias or whatever. So it's good to have that experience.
Okay. Can either of you give an example of a policy that's been changed regarding bias?
I can't at this time.
Okay, so Sheriff, I'm never quite sure if you want to contribute or if there's just a pause in the technology.
No, I can't. I don't think we have one right offhand, but I think that I think I'll just watch and listen to you guys.
Okay, I'll try to keep an eye out for the
Maybe
bright
I'll have
green.
a better connection next time.
Okay, I'll take a look for the bright green line in case you're attempting to talk to us. So the next question from an attendee is, do you believe that the historical and racial background of the banning of marijuana may be something that could keep African-American people from wanting to live in Moscow regarding of their usage of marijuana? So this seems to be a question on the interaction between marijuana use and its legality.
Can you read that one more time, please?
Yeah, so it says, do you believe that the historical and racial background of the banning of marijuana may be something that could keep African-American people from wanting to live in Moscow, regardless of their usage of marijuana? So it doesn't matter whether they use or not, but just the kind of, there's this intersection between race and the legality of drugs historically. So I think the question is trying to get at that intersection of people's comfort living in the community given drug laws and their legality.
Yeah, I don't know if that might be a better answered by one of the other panelists. I'm not sure if that would stop people from living in Moscow. You know, if I did smoke marijuana, I would just live in Washington, to be quite honest with you. I wouldn't take the chance of living in a state where it's still illegal. So, but I suppose that could. I don't know. I don't know if that would stop people or not.
Maybe if I could put a different twist on that. How is the legalization of marijuana in Washington, our very close neighbor, given half the people on the panel are from working at Washington State University. How does that translate across the state line into the things that you're doing? Have you changed your policies, police behavior, any of those things around marijuana, especially given your student population? Although I'm sure vandals don't smoke weed, I just, you know.
You mean is Floyd's called the Moscow connection?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I wouldn't say we've changed anything. You know, we still issue citations at times. We still give warnings at times. We still, if there's a large amount where it's a dealer level, they would probably go to jail. Do people smoke marijuana in Idaho? Yes. Idaho just hasn't chosen yet to make it where it's not illegal. But we have not changed anything in our practice at the police department, one way or the other.
Do you find that any members of the community, Trymaine, did I just cut you off, please? Okay. Are any members of the community maybe more emboldened by the legal status of marijuana in Washington and being a little more flagrant about it in Moscow, or is it just not an issue? You're seeing it about the same?
Well, I would say that marijuana we do find now is nicely packaged. THC levels are on the sticker compared to the old days where you'd find them in a sandwich bag or whatever. So I think that's the only change that we've seen. I don't know that it's been bolstered, but there's always been marijuana use on campus and in the community. So I don't know that those levels have went up or down. But like I said, now we just find it where it's packaged from one of the distributors.
Okay. So another question is, once again, related to recruitment. It says approximately what percentage of potential officers have you found with extremist views that have made them inappropriate for the Moscow Police Department? And has that number been going up over the years? So have you noticed a change in extremist views in the folks who are applying for positions?
We have not. I don't know that I've had any reports, and I go over every background after it's completed prior to offering a job. I don't know that I've seen any that would have what I would consider extremist views, whether they're white supremacy or I've never seen that. That'd be a very quick turnaround on where we would go with that. So I don't recall seeing that in our backgrounds.
Okay, thank you. So this is a related question, is what is the leeway of things you find on possible hires? So is there stuff that are hard red flags and then warning stuff, or is all the stuff you're looking for hard no's for being hired? Like, you know, are there any gray areas where you grapple with?
Yeah, so there's a lot of areas that we have to, under the IDAPA rules with the Idaho Post, they have certain guidelines of, you know, felonies. It's an immediate, you're not going to be a police officer with us. If we found anything in your background where you've lied or are a continual liar, you're not any good to the law enforcement profession. You know, some misdemeanors, there's been, so let's say marijuana usage in college, I would probably end up having to go down to the Post Academy and, you know, defend the officer and give reasons why we believe that the officer was no longer, you know, partaking in that activity. So we look at all that different types of stuff. There are some, you know, obviously, any domestic abuses or child molestation type stuff, you're not going to be an officer with us. Now, speeding tickets, you know, we all seem to get a few of those, but we look at the serious stuff. But misdemeanor level stuff will always be scrutinized.
Sheriff, I saw your mic go off and we
Yeah,
can actually.
I wanted to say something, but I didn't know if I should.
Okay, try.
So we look for, when we're checking the backgrounds and stuff like that, we're looking for things that might be habitual. So if you smoke pot once or twice or something, you know, like Chief Fry said, when you were in college, that's not habitual. If you smoke pot 18 times 3 days before you come in and applied, there's probably an issue. Or not just pot, but anything else, you know. And then misdemeanor stuff, we wouldn't hire. Probably likely wouldn't hire anybody with any misdemeanors.
Okay.
Did that come through?
Yeah, it did. It was good.
Yay.
So how safe do you feel on the job during times like this? So how are your officers feeling with all this political tension, racial tension, conflict? How are your officers handling all that?
Well, you know, it's been an interesting year with everything that's taken place. You know,
I think if you build relationships,
We lost you again, Sheriff.
well, I'm not having much fun.
Well, I think all that de-escalation training you've had is working.
I think
because we haven't heard you swear at the
I
technology once.
I would like to think that Chief Fry's people and my people are building.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sheriff.
Good.
Okay.
So I like the fact that myself and my deputies and Chief Fry's people, we just build community relationships. That's what part of community policing is about. And so
All right. Maybe Chief Fry, you can help out the sheriff here and round out this
right.
talk.
Yeah, you know,
I'll just continue to listen.
You know, the last year has been difficult. Obviously, you know, there's been, like you said, political tension, racial tension, all kinds of things that have affected the officers. But I think that's where we're very fortunate to live in the communities that we live in, and we're very fortunate to have those relationships. And, you know, it saddens me to think that the bigger communities around cannot build or be successful in building those relationships. You know, we didn't see the rioting that burned down buildings and attacks on officers like that. So I think we're doing really well. But part of it is possibly where we live and some of the relationships that we have built over time. And we continue to build and continue to try to stay neutral in our service of all community members.
Right, thank you. We're down to just a few minutes left, and I would like to give our panelists an opportunity maybe to just make a summary statement. So why don't we start with you, Chief Fry, and then we'll speak with Trymaine and David, and then hopefully the sheriff, maybe we'll get him in too.
You know, we do live in a unique area, and we have great communities. And I think what we always have to remember is even though we may have some differing points of view or differing religious or political views, we can still come together and still strive to make our community great. And part of that is having some tough discussions like we've had tonight. You know, there's obviously been a few things you know, about the thin blue line or the thin blue line flag that makes us a little maybe have a little anxiety, but it's not because we believe it's tied to white supremacy. I can tell you that we do not put the flag on our vehicles, but what we believe is we do believe that we are the thin blue line between good and evil, and that's all that line means to us, is that we stand in the gap and we stand there you know, with a very neutral service to all. But we also have to recognize that's not what it means to everybody else. So I think if we continue to have these communications and have these topics and work through it, you know, we need to also probably bring in Chief Jenkins and Sheriff Myers and have some of these tough conversations too, because it's not just an Idaho thing. This goes across the state lines as well. But I do appreciate that you know, we have staff from WSU and here to work with us and talk with us. So I do appreciate that.
All right. Trymaine, would you like to follow up?
Sure. I just want to first say thank you, and I really enjoyed. I appreciate this opportunity to be on this panel. I think it's important to think about what we want our police to do for us, and how to foster that relationship. And for me, I want the police who are serving and protecting me and my family to be highly competent, most specifically highly competent in evidence-based strategies. And I also want to pose this question to the community. When is it a public safety issue versus an I don't feel safe issue? Are those brown youth loitering on that street corner or socializing? And is there more bias training needed for the entire community, not just the police?
Right. Thank you, Trymaine. David, would you like to have a final comment?
No, I appreciate that. I again, love the conversation here and the questions looking through here. I think that in many ways, you know, thinking about the community and what they ask of agencies and what we expect of them is to be very transparent in what they do and to be held accountable for what they do. And that really means putting the pressure on agencies if they're not transparent with their policies or their data, asking of them those tougher questions on what does your use of force policy look like? Do we have some input around, you know, the strategy and tactics that we want in our community? Because it really has to be about our community. And again, it's, you know, protect and serve or protect. We have to decide as a community what the role of police is in our communities. And again, you can create accountability. You can ask for transparency. In some regards, it's just asking those questions because the agencies themselves haven't thought about it, because that's not where their position, where they come from. So accountability and transparency. And if we don't like the law in our local community, well, can we use city ordinances and change the law? That's a conversation that we're having right now in Pullman around what should be a city ordinance and what should be handled through alternative means.
All right, thank you. All right. Sheriff Skiles, we're just out of time, but I want to give you one last opportunity to have a final word here.
Well, so I just want to thank you very much. I apologize for the bad connection. And I just want to thank you, everybody, for your questions and concerns. And I think these conversations are very important so we can see how everybody feels and get these things out in the open. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We heard you loud and clear that time, Sheriff. That's great. I appreciate everybody's time, and I will turn it back over to Dr. Fonts.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to all our panelists and our moderator for answering all the questions in this very important discussion. And thanks to all our attendees who participated, especially with the questions. And the only last thing I want to say is that the Moscow Human Rights Commission will be holding a social justice forum on April 8th with the topic of restorative justice. And so that there will be information going out on that to everybody, that we'll do another webinar with a whole different panel of experts on restorative justice. And so keep that in mind for the near future. And so thanks all of you for attending, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. And so good night then, I guess. So,
Okay.
and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.